who many of you know. He formerly was at Heidelberg, is that right?
That's right.
And has moved to the University of Salzburg in the ZKIS Geoinformatics Institute there, and has done a lot of work with various kinds of sensor networks. And last year spoke to us about social media, and this year going back to, is it urban sensor networks? Or
not so really, be surprised.
Did we start the broadcast yet? Okay,
yeah.
Great, perfect. Thank you, Bernd.
Okay, thanks a lot, Lex, for this brief introduction. For those who don't know me, and there may be some people, right? My name is Bernd Resch, obviously. I'm an assistant professor at University of Salzburg in Austria. And I'm dealing mostly with sensor networks in the wider sense. I'm a computer scientist by education, so I come from really technical sensor networks, technical sensing infrastructures, standardized sensor networks, and really technical sensors in terms of physical sensors, putting them out and measure the environment, for example. And then I extended the sensor term for myself a bit into the direction of human sensing. I'm going to show a few examples then, meaning that first of all, we really sense humans, meaning physiological responses to different environments, but also human sensors in terms of feedback in smartphone apps and social media and the entire myriad of user-generated data. So in my previous presentations, I mostly focused on, let's say, research results, new methods, new algorithms. Today, I'm going to focus a bit more on implications, challenges, not only from a societal viewpoint, but also from a geoinformatics, geoscience viewpoint, meaning how our field actually transforms, and try to look a bit behind the scenes from what I think where we're going in terms of collaboration with other disciplines, in terms of incorporation of methods from other scientific fields and so on. And the reason why I'm doing this is that I think that geoinformatics as a field is just transforming at the moment, in the sense that we use different methods, we use different algorithms, we use different kinds of data. Perhaps we don't even understand the data yet so well, yet we try to apply our geospatial analysis algorithms. So this might be dangerous and not even valid to some degree. Good. What I'm going to talk about today is this. First of all, I'm still going to sketch out a few research flashlights, a little bit of an update as delta to last year, basically. 2 or 3 slides have been there last year as well, maybe interesting for those people who haven't been here last year. And then I'm going to go into the central part, namely a geo-privacy by design guideline that we have developed over the last few months, and in which we try to raise sensitivity and awareness for these kinds of topics, rather than always just developing methods from a techno-positivistic side. And finally, I'd like to present a new project. It's just starting only, which is called Human Plus. And what I'd like to share with you are some initial thoughts, and on the other hand, collect your feedback and your opinions on what we're doing there. If time permits, and I guess unfortunately rather not, I'd like to conclude with a few thoughts on a field that I call human-centered geoinformatics. This is what I'm just elaborating in my habilitation thesis as well, meaning that we need to put humans, whatever these are, more to the center of our developments. Okay, so the main starting point of my work is always something like this. What we have seen over the last 10 years is that we have moved from a data-scarce to data-rich environment in our analysis. So we see that these kinds of data are available, imagery, think about Aster, think about Landsat, and so on. Not so much my cup of tea, so I'm mostly working with point data sources, but still they're freely available as well. Of course, we see this entire myriad of social networks, social media channels, which mostly have an API where most of the data, with restrictions, of course, are available over the internet, so we can just download, harvest, and analyze them. And then there is this rather new development, let's say, of the quantified self movement, using wearables to measure whatever physiological parameters you want. From a non-scientific purpose, measuring yourself and being interested about yourself, how you work, how you perform. From scientific viewpoint, this could be, and that's what we're doing, measuring physiological responses to different kinds of environments, in my case, mostly urban environments. And what we're generating here are millions and billions of data sets that we haven't had before, basically. And if we would use these data sets in our traditional geospatial analysis algorithms, just put them on a map or whatever, it would probably look something like this. So we're basically drowning in different kinds of information and data. And what we need to do is to apply the right algorithms to make sense of these data. And this is what we're at the moment trying to pursue in my research group. Some of you may remember this from last year. What we see here are the temporal signatures of different topics, meaning semantic topics, really what people talk about in tweets. 42 million tweets over a year in the city of London. And what we did here is that we did not look for, let's say, keywords, as would be the most simple approach, but we put our data into a self-learning system called LDA, a topic modeling approach, basically. And these topics were generated by itself. So in the sense that we did not apply any a priori knowledge, we did not apply any assumptions, but this was totally automatically generated. And if we take a look at the different signatures, we can see that the different topics are quite well reflected, at least it seems plausible, in social media. So for example, the first topic would be a work topic, what people talk about. I'm going to work, I'm at work, and so on. Mostly dominant throughout the week, predominantly on Monday to Thursday, not so much on Friday and weekends. Second one, a transportation topic, mostly showing strong peaks in the mornings and in the evenings, and also rather much during the week, and not so much during the weekends. Same thing with a sports topic. So Saturday afternoon, evening, Sunday afternoon, evening, standard soccer matches, league matches in London. There are about 5 or 6 clubs that are rather large, causing these kinds of like Twitter bumps, plus Tuesday nights and Wednesday nights, which would be Champions League, meaning international games of the soccer clubs. So these are just 3 examples, and I could go on, but the idea behind this is what we have is a bunch of data. 42 million is not too much. I mean, it's only a small sample compared to what you're doing and harvesting also here at CGA. But it's still a lot when we want to analyze it geospatially. So if we would put these data into, let's say, a GIS software that we're using every day, we would face trouble, obviously. And this is why we need different algorithms for analyzing these data. Self-learning system, LDA in this case. Of course, if we put these temporal signatures to the map, meaning as spatial signatures, we would also see very characteristic signatures in terms of, for example, the sports topic would cluster around stadiums, for example. Okay, so this is the starting point. Now we generate these topics, and what we're doing right now is that we try to see what the spatial, temporal, and linguistic characteristics of each of these topics are. And this is the approach here. What we did was to generate 6 dimensions, 2 in linguistic space, 2 in temporal space, 2 in geospace. Not mentioning what they are right now, and feed them into a self-organizing map. A self-organizing map is an artificial neural network, basically a dimensionality reduction tool coming from the area of bioinformatics. And what we're doing there is that we compress the 6 dimensions into 2 with a 2-dimensional output map. It's not a map in the sense that we would understand it as a cartographic map, but just a 2-dimensional collection of cells, let's say. And what the sum does, that's the particularity of a sum, is that if there are topological relationships, meaning proximities, in the 6-dimensional input space in this case, these topological relationships would also be preserved in the 2-dimensional output space. So what's close in input space is also close in output space. And that's important for us, obviously. Now the output is this. What we see here is the output of the self-organizing map, in this case the geosum, which puts a little more focus on the geographic dimensions here, shows us that topic 2 here, which is the transportation topic, if you remember, shows different kinds of clusters. And clusters are these bright spots here that again would form bright clusters. What this means is that these clusters contain values that are close in the input space, meaning people talk about the same thing, meaning people tweet about these aspects very close to each other in time and closely in space. Now, for the transportation topic, what we can see is that these bright clusters basically center around the stations in London, Waterloo Station here, Paddington Station, Liverpool Street Station, King's Cross, and so on. Not exactly surprising, but a nice output. If we do this for another topic, for example, the sports topic, as we said, we also see these bright clusters again, and they cluster around the soccer stadiums, the Emirates Stadium here, O2 Stadium, Wembley Stadium, and so on. Okay, so what we've done now then is to take the self-organizing maps, the outputs here, of all 8 topics that I showed before, and then compress them into one, which is called a hierarchical sum. Cascading, basically, we do the same thing to the outputs again and compress them again. So dimensionality reduction again from 8 dimensions in this case then to 2 output dimensions. And what we see here is again another self-organizing map, and the different topics would be represented in the single clusters. So for example, topic 1 here, the work topic, if you remember, here color-coded in green, is mostly present here in the inner city of London and surroundings, not so much in the outskirts. Topic 3, for example, is again the sports topic, is only available and shown in particular regions here in this purple color, namely around the stadiums, up here, up here, up here, and so on. Not obviously in the inner city. Topic 4 would be a shopping topic, what people talk about. They're doing either groceries or go shopping. Here color-coded in red, is surprisingly more present in the outskirts and not so much in the inner city. So I'm not focusing so much on the qualitative conclusions here, but what I want to say here is that using these kinds of self-learning systems is a bit of a different approach, obviously. We do not pursue this traditional hypothesis-driven approach. We have a hypothesis, try to find the methods, prove or disprove the hypothesis or null hypothesis. But it's more of a data-driven approach. Shove the data into a system, what comes out is this, and then we can interpret it in order to generate hypotheses that can then be again proven or disproven. That's obviously a different approach that is not so much common in, let's say, geography and the social sciences in general, but which is getting more and more important.
I have a question about this.
Go ahead.
I kind of get what you're saying. Do you normalize this data against anything? And let me say, for example, if you have 1,000 out of 1,000 tweets talking about sports in this location, 1,000 out of 100,000 tweets talking about sports in this location, do they get the same weight when they talk about sports?
Yes. Okay. In this case, yes, because we do the topic filtering first, right? So if we take a look at this again, the sports topic here has a signature. And the signature, as you see on the y-axis, is made up out of a count. So this is basically a histogram, hourly aggregations over a week, basically. And so each entity in this count would basically be a tweet. So each tweet is assigned a topic, okay? And that's where we filter, right? So
you answered my question, which is you're just going order of magnitude, not relative magnitude.
That's right. So we're not accounting for, let's say, population density, tweet density, and so on. That's correct. Not in this case. Another piece of research that I showed also last year that has been just published right now in which we delineate earthquake footprints and try to assess the affected population in the Napa earthquake. There, of course, we do normalization over tweets and population. So it depends on the use case of it.
So in this case, you're really not treating it as a sample. You're saying there are these occurrences. And,
yes. Yeah.
Can one tweet be assigned two topics?
Not in this case.
Not in this case. So every tweet is only
yeah.
belonging to one topic only.
Exactly. We assign it the strongest topic. Okay. Again, point being, data-driven rather than hypothesis-driven. I'm not saying this is better or worse, but it's a different approach that may gain more acknowledgement in the future. Second thing, and here this new research we haven't shown so far. Go ahead.
Just a real quick question. I mean, it's in many aspects hypothesis-free, but you are hypothesizing that this is different from random.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, that's for sure. But I mean, this is what we're proving before, obviously. So what we're doing here is in the if I understand correctly, you mean the spatial dimension, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So and you're using Moran's eye on your reduced.
Exactly. No, of course we do the checks before it, in the sense that we can actually apply local Moran's eye. So we assess the autocorrelation of the entire data set before we do the actual local analysis. That's clear.
But
yeah.
You're actually doing that on your reduced dimensions as well, aren't you?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's right. I mean, what goes in here obviously is again hypothesizing. That's definitely correct, and this is what I would like to get to in the end, perhaps, that we put the geographication in here and the nearest neighbor distance. So it has to do with some kind of hypothesis clustering that we of course proved before doing this. One issue could be, is Waller-Tolber's law actually true and can it be applied to social media data? That's a totally different story, and this is what we're just trying to elaborate on and work out, because it has not been published so far. But I think there should be a rather simple disproof. There was this long conversation between Dan Zui and Waller-Tolber and Mike Kuchal. Okay, the second research effort I want to get into and also do a bit of qualitative interpretation is the connection between tweets, sports events, and crime, because this is rather new. What we know is that a high volume of tweets is created during sports events. Okay, good. Second, the spatial and temporal correlations between social media and crime occurrence, and also between social media and sports events, is also proven. I mean, there have been a lot of studies, especially in the crime sector. Now, what has not been proven so far is the threefold connection between all three dimensions, namely Twitter, sports, and crime. What we want to do is to correlate tweets, sports, and crime. I'm going to show you this in a second. And in particular, we're going to focus on correlating violent crimes with sports and crime in general. Violent tweets, sorry. Tweets with sports and crime. Our approach is this, just very quickly. We basically just do some pre-processing of crime data. These are crime data in the city of Birmingham for like, I don't know, 5 years. And we do temporal binning, just very simple, same with the tweets. What we also do with the tweets is, again, apply LDA as before, meaning extracting topics and then extracting the sports topic, or there is a very dedicated football topic actually in this case, because we only take the days of the soccer games, and we also extract violent tweets, in this case keyword-based selection. And then we take these crime data and the tweets and do our spatial analysis on them. First of all, geospatial statistics, assess where they are autocorrelated, and then calculate the autocorrelation LISA clusters. And then we also check whether these data can actually be used, and that's the next step, for predictive analysis using a binomial logistic regression. So if we just put, again, the data onto a timescale, that's what it looks like. On the left-hand side, we have the crime data, meaning these are the official reported crime occurrences. KO would be the kickoff time here, so hour 0. And what we view is a window of ±4 hours from 4 hours from the kickoff. In black, we would have the match days, and in gray, the comparison days, meaning basically all non-match days. And what we see here already is that there are quite significant characteristics again. Just exploratory data analysis, not statistically proven in this case, that an hour before kickoff or right before kickoff, crime increases. We're going to see which crimes these are. And this is Saturday and Sunday, by the way, Saturday and Sunday. Whereas for Wednesday, yeah, similar signature, but still a little bit different because it seems to start a little later. Same thing with tweets on the other side. So here, the peak is a bit shifted, obviously, namely towards the kickoff. So directly in the hour of the kickoff, there are the most tweets being generated. Again, there is a bit of a difference between Saturday and Sunday versus Wednesday. What we obviously see as well is that there is a clear difference between the comparison days of the match days. But that's, yeah, I wouldn't say a given, but this was as expected. So what we did then was just to calculate densities for crime events and tweets. And what do we see here? In the upper row, number 1 are match days. Number 2 are comparison days, meaning non-match days. And then we have different data types here. So A are all crimes, meaning all crimes on match days pretty much center around the stadiums, whereas they are more dispersed on non-match days. Okay, that's a good outcome already. Up here we have Birmingham City University. I don't know what that exactly means, and the shopping mall. So I don't know why exactly here this crime or high density of reported crimes happens as well. B would be the geolocated tweets. What we see here is that we have a clear signature as well that they cluster around the stadium, whereas here it looks highly different. Same thing here with the violent tweets, and for the football-related tweets, we see that they also cluster around the stadium. And on comparison days, there are basically no football-related tweets available at all, which kind of proves that our methodology works as well. Okay, now if we go into the density and distinguish them by crime types, and this was our initial goal, right? Namely criminal damage, theft and handling, and violence against the person were 3 crime types that we wanted to take a look at. And they look as follows. Again, the 3 crime types in the 3 columns, match days and comparison days in the 2 rows. So basically what we can see from the maps here is that all crime types are clustered around the stadium on match days. Okay. What's a bit surprising is that violence against the person is really only happening more or less in the vicinity of the stadium. So could be the indicator on match days. Whereas the other 2 are clustered also around the stadium, but in a wider radius. So I guess here with the temporal signature would be an important factor in the sense that criminal damage here and theft and handling here could actually happen before and after the game. People go out for drinking, are not so happy with the match results, something like this. But we haven't checked this yet. So again, the conclusion would be that the correlation between crime, Twitter, and sports events is evident and can be extracted from tweets. If we now do a bivariate spatial autocorrelation, this hypothesis is underpinned. It's not extremely strong, but it still shows tendencies at least, meaning we spatially correlate 2 variables. In general, we observe a higher correlation on match days than on comparison days. So these 3 would usually be higher than these 3. Okay, so match days show a higher amount of, first of all, crimes and tweets than non-match days. Yeah.
It seems like normalization by where people are could help clarify. Because if you say, crime are done by people, tweets are sent by people, so where there are people, there's these things. So that the event itself is only playing the factor of gathering people rather than generating more crime or anything else. But I don't know. I mean, that's a hypothesis, definitely.
You mean average? Yes. I mean, that I think seems a given, right? And that's known from crime literature as well.
But if you could say that the density increases, like the rate.
Yeah, you mean like crimes per person, so to say?
Yeah, crimes per person. Then there'll be a different.
Yeah,
but it might also be a proxy for simple density, street traffic.
Right.
That's clear. I mean, that's for example over here. We have a very densely populated neighborhood, very popular, very like many publicly accessible places like bars, restaurants, shops, and so on. So this, I would say, definitely correlates with population density. For the other one, we need to take a look at this because, like for example, here, here we don't have any spatial autocorrelation, meaning there are no density clusters, right? So in this case, this would actually underpin your hypothesis that the match is generating this. So the second conclusion from here is that, or just an observation basically, that there is a lower correlation between tweets and violence against the person crimes compared to other crime types. So over here, we see that we have a rather low autocorrelation measure, whereas in the others, it's a bit higher. Whatever that means, and we need to take a look at this as well. And then, of course, we have a slightly higher correlation between crime and violent tweets, meaning all different crime types and the violent tweets as compared to all tweets. So comparing these two figures, and these two, which indicates that obviously the hypothesis that extracting violent tweets may give us a better data sample should actually work. Okay, so again, these are really preliminary results, and we have not published these yet. So this is just in the process of research.
How do you find out it's a violent tweet or not? Do you do some kind of machine learning?
No, as mentioned before, this is just a keyword-based selection. Okay. It's about like 400 to 500 keywords generating the tweets then.
Maybe the sentiment of the tweet might also let you know if it's a violent tweet or not.
Yeah.
Or so as the Twitter sentiment correlates to crime, and more negative tweets are driving crime somewhere.
Definitely. I'm going to get to this in a second, actually. Not for crime, but. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'm not going to draw any conclusions here for now, but what we can see is that there are at least significant correlations between crime, Twitter, and sports, and this is what we want to prove. I'm just going to go very quickly into the output for the bivariate ELISA clusters. So high clusters around the stadiums again, as expected, during match days, not on comparison days. And for the regression as a basis for the predictions, I'm not going to go into detail with this because this is just like really starting in our analysis. But what it tells us basically is that the probability of predicting crime events can be increased using different kinds of data sources when we combine them. But there is still much research to be done, so I'm not gonna mention it in detail. Okay, one more before we go into the privacy by design part of the presentation. Urban Motions, I guess most of you may remember our long-running initiative where we try to use emotion information to achieve better, meaning more human-centric and citizen-centric planning. And what we're doing is that, first of all, we extract emotions from tweets and other social media channels. Then we have another part which deals with extracting emotions from physiological sensors and couple them with a People as Sensors app, meaning an e-diary where people could actually tell us what happened. We combine these and feed them back into urban planning. And what this looks like is this, in this case, extracting emotions from social media. What we proposed here and our approach that we pursued used a semi-supervised learning approach. So a bit of a combination between totally manual and totally automated, because emotions are highly subjective and cannot easily be detected by computers. So we're just publishing a paper, by the way, where we're doing a method benchmark between a manual one, our semi-automated one, and a fully automated one. It shows that the semi-automated one is quite close to the manual one, actually. Manual means, this is how we create our gold standard, really annotation. We used like 7 people, and they sat down and rated or classified 1,000 tweets, saying this tweet contains the emotion: happiness, none; sadness, fear, none; and so on, right? 4 basic emotions: happiness, sadness, fear, and anger. There are different emotion models from emotional psychology. That's the one we chose for several reasons. And what we did then is to use the gold standard, like half of it as a training data set, feed it into our graph-based machine learning algorithm called label propagation. So what it basically does is that it creates a graph. The graph would consist of nodes, which are the tweets, and edges, which are the similarities between tweets. So the more similar they are, the more likely they contain the same emotion. And this is the idea of the graph-based machine learning algorithm. We start with the seeds, and the label would propagate along the thickest edges. And the similarity computation, meaning the actual value of the edges, is done here. And that's one of the major advances here as well. That we use, again, the 3 different dimensions, namely geospatial proximity, temporal proximity, and also similarity in linguistic space, as depends, but input dimensions which are used with the same weight, basically. So linguistic, people talk about the same things. How we prove this? Temporal, they're posted close to another in time. Geospatial, posted close to each other in geospace. And using these similarities, we can then generate a graph that is then filled with emotions through the labeling process. The output looks like this. I'm just going to show one of these because it's for Boston here. So these are the classified emotions. And if we take a look at a few of them, it seems that they're somewhat correctly classified. I'm not going to read this out because otherwise my mom would be unhappy with me. But so we see that there is a small cluster down here, and we're just trying to use more tweets. Problem is that our algorithm at the moment scales quadratically. So we're only able to label about 10,000 tweets or so. And we're just increasing performance here. But there is a small cluster around Fenway Park, which is pretty distinct, and we know what people talk about. There are still some in there, some sad tweets as an aftermath of the Boston Marathon bombings in 2013, and so on. So again, the idea is we try to classify people and then look what happens, in the sense that this could be information, obviously, which could go back to urban planners. Yeah, is this particular situation there may not be exactly surprising, but it still shows that we can regenerate what's happening. And then we can take a look into other clusters and see what's happening there.
So Harvard is mostly happy, except for the Kennedy School.
Yeah, good point. Haven't seen this. There is another like angry one. I don't know what it is. Perhaps biking. So if you remember, Emotions does 2 things. First of all, use social media. This. Second, wearables and smartphone apps. And that's the second part. We try to collect subjective perceptions of people that refer to places. And what we do is we equip them with our sensors, like chest belts, wristbands, and so on, and measure a number of different parameters, including galvanic skin response, including body temperature, ECG, and a few others, that we then amalgamate and try to extract emotions from the signals. Yeah, that sounds nice, doesn't work so well. So complementing these signals, we still need some kind of ground truth. And that is what people will tell us then. So those two are coupled. And I'm going to show this in a second. But what happens if the sensor measures something like a peak, like a stress moment, the app would notify the user, participant, and ask, hey, what actually happened? And then the user could input which kind of emotion, which kind of context, and also a free text field of what actually happened. So something like, well, I was around my bike and a car nearly hit me, for example. And then, of course, we derive stress situations in different kinds of urban environments, project it back to geographic space, and then draw conclusions and inferences from our results. The test setup looked like this. This was like 2 years ago already. We equipped people with our sensors, here a wristband. Below the shirt, there is still the chest belt. Equip them with cameras to have some video footage to actually track back what happened. Then here on the bike handle, we have the smartphone mounted, and off they go. And what they basically do is they just cycle through a city without too many instructions, and we try to analyze what happened. Again, of course, by the way, to address the question up front already, normalized. So normalized over the person, meaning the individual or individual responses to urban environments is obviously totally different from person to person. And secondly, also normalized in terms of a daily normalization, meaning that the same person over different days may show different responses. And we did this through let them cycle in the beginning through a standardized route, then level out the baseline, and then analyze the data. So the results look like this. Some of them may not be so surprising. So red are clusters of stress peaks. Here at Central Square, we know what happens, right? Bus crossing the bus lane into the bus stop, the bike traffic merging into the car lane, then lots of streets coming together, lots of pedestrians on the street, and so on and so on. So this is obviously a situation which is not so optimal for cyclists. We also know that Harvard Square has a few issues there. We also know that down here we have a really dangerous situation where a lot of fatalities already actually happen, and so on. Good thing when reproducing these is that we actually show that our approach works in that we can reproduce known situations. And then we're going to discuss this with urban planners in order to find out what other situations mean which may not have been anticipated. If there are red areas on there which people or urban planners wouldn't have known about. Okay, so this is the general background of our research and what we're doing. Formally, what we said were things like, yeah, Twitter, these data are available on the internet. Everybody can download them. They're publicly available, so we don't have to care so much about privacy. Nowadays, we're a bit more sensitive to this, and in each of my projects, there is a dedicated privacy by design, either work package or this task, in which we try to address these kinds of questions and issues. And this is the outcome of the few recent months in which we tried to design a geo-privacy by design guideline. And I'm going to show you what it looks like. So first of all, we mostly talk about participatory sensing data. All these body sensors, e-diaries, smartphone apps, what I showed. Parameters that can be measured are, of course, physiological, but also the location is an important one, obviously, and a strong proxy for identity, as we know. And time, different kinds of images, sound, videos, and so on. Application areas have been proven in literature, ranging from personal and public health to emotion sensing, as I just showed, location-based services and alerts, noise monitoring, and a lot more, of course. While the privacy by design guideline is mostly dedicated to these kinds of data, participatory sensing, they're, I would say, to a great degree also applicable to collectively sensed data, meaning social media, mobile phone network data, and so on. So privacy, I don't know, I guess I don't have to go over these in detail because you might know about these definitions from like 1968 already. Still true, but the big question being, what do we do with virtual spaces when we talk about the public domain and so on? These discussions have been there for a while. Then there is a clear distinction between privacy and location privacy. Mostly just further developments of privacy, including the location of a person. So in the end, what most privacy definitions say is you, being the person who the data refers to, need to be able to prevent disclosure and control disclosure of your data, including your location, obviously. Hard to define, and this is something which doesn't make it easier. So issues are pretty obvious, I guess. Just name a few of them. Location is a strong proxy for identity. You guys at MIT shown this like 3-4 years ago. That only 4 positions are at minimum necessary to identify a person. Flaws in there. Then, of course, it has the potential to compromise people's privacy if we disclose their information and personal data. And then there is a question of what does public domain nowadays still mean if we integrate the concept of virtual spaces, including social media and so on, into our thinking. So what we came up with was a 5-step privacy by design guideline that comprises initial activities, meaning precautions more or less, establishing safe settings more from an IT viewpoint, dissemination of findings, a really important one. So what do you have to do before you actually present your results to the public? Disclosure of anonymized data sets and sharing them with third parties. And I'd like to go through these steps one by one right now. Initial activities. Of course, privacy-preserving research plan should be there always, meaning prevent privacy infringements right up front through the study design. Then an opt-in agreement is pretty much standard. Meanwhile, you let people sign something, you give them information about what's done with the data, how long they are stored, where they are stored, which kinds of analysis is done with them, what you can do and what you also cannot do. Okay, then of course, informing about location privacy and associated risks is an important thing, meaning people would often share their data without actually being aware of the risks. Think about Facebook, Twitter, and so on. I don't know how many Twitter users know that their tweets are actually public and can be downloaded through a computer program legally without a problem. Same with Facebook. We see what happens there, and I don't know when people get fired.
Clearly not all of them know.
I don't know how many of the AGBs of the systems you use have you read? I think I didn't. But that's the terms and conditions. This is a separate story then. And an ethical board, I mean, this is a somewhat self-evident thing nowadays as well, that install an independent group of people or institutions that oversee your research, that you run by your results and your analysis, your approaches, which would then put you on the safe side of life. Good, then safe settings comes more from an IT side. First of all, data security is clear, so put data where they are secure, for example, inside a university if you trust them. Then privacy by design already in the study setup, as I mentioned before, be sure what your study does, where data are stored and so on. Then of course, remove existing data from devices that are used in the study so that a person who participates in the study gets an empty device and does not contain any data from the previous participant anymore. Then define clear access criteria for restricted access data sets. So who may access them, for what reasons, for how long, and so on. Logging is obviously an important one. So always be sure you log and note down when data are actually shared with whom and when and where they are stored. And of course, anonymization is an important factor. I'm not going to go into this because I think we know a lot about the, let's say, methods which we can use there. Of course, use numeric IDs instead of clear names and so on. But this is a separate story. Yeah.
So that sort of in research, the idea of how to remove the PII and so on is pretty clear. But I wonder if there's this next stage, which is kind of anticipating the anonymization strategies? Is that part of what you're doing now?
No, that's a really interesting point that you're raising. Let me just go down to another slide that, or why don't we discuss this? No, let me get on right now. Because what we did is to discuss a few different anonymization strategies, and these I could show, of course. Coming up here. So we know that for different data sets, we have different ways of anonymizing, right? If we talk about microdata, meaning individual data that that refer to single persons and so on, there we can do this. For confidential and discrete spatial data, meaning healthcare crime, and there is a distinction obviously between privacy and confidentiality that I didn't go into. We can do this. I don't know how much I should go through this. I think these are pretty much standardized methods. How you get to these and why to use which in which cases, that's a major question that I don't know whether it can be answered in generic fashion. But that's a really good one.
Are you aware of any software tools to actually crank it through for you?
For these methods, yes, of course.
For location, yeah, for these methods.
For these methods, yes.
Yeah.
Not for assessing the risk and so on. I mean, that's a totally different story, meaning that's what I'm going to get to. How do you assess the risk of somebody's privacy being infringed? And there are methods for this actually, but they're really vague still, and this is an important thing. But there are no structured methods that would be generically applicable.
So not even, I was thinking that a location-based privacy, right? Privacy by location, whether you can identify something at a location, even if you after you move it
Yeah,
far. Right?
Totally. I mean, all this depends on spatial density, obviously, right?
It's density,
Of the data sets and so on. So I guess there is no really generic answer to this. Also in terms of aggregation, for example, right? I mean, location-based, meaning spatial aggregation, may not always be the best case, but like the census tracts, for example, in the UK, use a numeric aggregation. They say we need spatial units that have exactly 5,000 entities in them. So it's not regularized or so. It's just different kinds of approaches for different kinds of data sets, I guess. Good, dissemination of findings. And this is something which I've been advocating for like for 10, 15 years. What we always need to think about is when we generate our results, how are they perceived and which conclusions can you draw from them? In the simplest case, for example, let's say air quality measurements. You measure air quality, you analyze air quality, and what comes out is a nice air quality map. You publish your paper, get your PhD, and you're happy. Problem with this could be air quality is a very strong indicator for very direct influence on people, including respirational diseases, including cardiovascular disease, including lung disease, and so on. So we really need to think about how we do this and how we present our results, because in the extreme case, this has very severe consequences for the individual. If I zoom in and zoom in and zoom in, and I have a really red area which person is living in, this has a consequence in terms of, let's say, housing markets, house prices, individual insurance rates, and so on. So this is something where we need to be really careful, because these kinds of individual level data are increasingly available, but cartography is mostly just a means of presenting information and not so much a scientific field. That's at least how many people perceive it. That needs to be rigorously followed. So appropriate spatial and temporal aggregation is clear. How to assess the appropriateness, again, I don't know. Just gives you a feeling. Anonymization, of course, aggregation spatially, numerically, geomasking, k-anonymity, everything which you can do, like inducing, let's say, random spatial error to make it harder to track back single entities. Then alternatives to point distribution maps. Of course, I would say we know this, but we put this into the paper because I think it may not be self-evident to some people that if you just put points on a map, I mean, this has a very clear meaning. If you aggregate them, if you, I don't know, do some kind of interpolation, if you create surfaces, if you do clustering, you have some kind of obfuscation which may already help. Then, of course, disclosure assessment on the masked point distribution map. So at some point, you need to say as well that the result is actually not correct, right? Because what you're doing is you're presenting an incorrect result, which does not comply with your original research outputs. And this needs to be clearly marked. And this goes hand in hand with the next point, namely disclosure of anonymized data sets. Here again, inform about the disclosure risk assessment and assess the anonymization effect on spatial analysis. Many journals nowadays, including PLOS ONE, for example, require you to hand in your data together with your paper. So for tweets, yeah, okay, this may not be too much of a problem if you don't get problems with Twitter. But for health data, for example, that's a totally different story. And there need to take precautions in order to preserve privacy. And again, inform about these. Quasi-identifiers and pseudonyms, clear. Avoid the release of multiple versions of anonymized datasets, because this can yield, or this can compromise the reproducibility of your research, obviously. And standardize the anonymization practices also to ensure reproducibility. So always use the same measures, use the same methods and algorithms to perform this, the anonymization. Okay, and finally, data sharing with third parties. Rather self-evident, some points in there as well. A licensing agreement should be clear. A data sharing agreement, DSA, for restricted data access, what can be done, what cannot be done. Perhaps even impose temporal restrictions on the data use, so not granting a perpetual license, but granting a temporary one. Then, of course, verify the trustworthiness. Of course, we don't give data to everybody. And consider the implications when sensible data are merged with other data. So here, different kinds of concerns that cities wouldn't put out their kindergarten locations, for example, into their public open government data repository, because they say, if you put this on a map and either mash it up or not, this is already something or information and a way of presenting information that may be used by, I don't know, different kinds of criminals, including pedophiles, to identify their next crime location, so to say. And these are, of course, levels that we're not normally thinking in. But this is something which should obviously concern us. And then, of course, review the research outputs before publication, whether publication actually complies with what is said before. Okay, so these were the geoprivacy by design guidelines. And just very quickly skipping over this project, Human Plus, let's say ensuring humanitarian safety through geoinformatics methods in the wider sense. The problems are pretty clear. These are all pictures from Salzburg, by the way, in 2015. People have been sleeping under the skies. Not too much of a problem in summer, but then it became like, yeah, October, where it can get really cold in Salzburg. Not so great. At Salzburg main station, here we see, and that's what I mentioned already to some of you, Salzburg is really, the city of Salzburg is bordering Germany, right? And Germany at some point closed the borders. And this is the bridge going over to Germany. And these are the German authorities blocking the way. So people would stand there outside, not being like taken care of very well, and just being stranded in the end. And what happened there was probably, yeah, not what we would wish for and expect for one of the richest countries in the world. So what we want to do is to ensure humanitarian safety, meaning through better reception, transfer, supply, and accommodation of migrants and refugees in general. So what we'd like to do, just go over this quickly, is to create an integrative near real-time situational awareness picture. What's happening, what will happen, and how we can support logistics to better receive these people. And what we're using is social media, that's mostly my part, then in situ imagery and remote sensing data. And then feed them back to decision makers. And the scientific objectives here are, first of all, to detect and predict short-term predictions of migration movements, then identify migration focal points, where the focus basically lies. And then, of course, really comprehensively treat LC aspects, the ethical, legal, societal impacts. Situational awareness picture should be clear, real-time data analysis, and support information and decision-making through up-to-date information. Scenarios are as follows. So which kinds of scenarios do we treat in our project? First of all, critical domestic situations, like the one I showed before. You have like a lot of people clustering, which may yield different kinds of problems that need to be addressed. Second, the optimization of cross-border information exchange. So what happened there in Salzburg, again, obviously not ideal. And then monitor international conflict areas, say somewhere in the Middle East, and then try to anticipate immigration movements. So I'm going to conclude with this slide, namely open questions that I would like to discuss with you. First of all, we would like to analyze trajectories, obviously, trajectory clustering or so. The question is whether this is a good idea using social media, because what we're seeing is mobility is somewhat reflected in social media, but it's not the best indicator, and trajectories are not homogeneous at all, as compared to, I don't know, GPS trajectories where you have a measurement point every second. Second thing is we need to do some kind of spatiotemporal analysis. And what I would like to do is spatial-temporal autocorrelation. And there are not so many concepts available for this. So LISA has been established for decades, LISTA not. And one of the major problems is obviously connecting space and time, so relating how many meters are 1 second. And this is something where we're still struggling with the bare concepts. The implementations are not a problem, and some of them are actually there as well. But the concept itself is still challenging, and I wonder whether you have any kind of either solutions or ideas there. Then additional data sources. Which kinds of additional data sources can we use? Environmental covariates, demographic covariates, I don't know. Then, of course, the eternal question of combining point data, social media in this case, with Earth observation data, information fusion, how? And then nowcasting and forecasting, that's why where I'm not an expert at all. Also, other people are doing this in the project in other institutions. But if you would have any ideas there, I would be more than happy. Let me quickly conclude, and then I get back to this slide. So, of course, none of these developments happens like by myself, locking myself up in the room. So thanks to all my collaborators, masses are growing, which is good. And so I hope we continue our high quality collaborations. So thank you again for inviting me, for your attention. And if you have comments on Human Plus, on the Geo-Privacy by Design guidelines, if you have further questions, I'm of course more than happy to discuss these. Thank you.
Help me what LISTA stands for again?
Local indicators for spatial-temporal association. LISA would be local Moran's eye, this like group of gamma statistics, right? Including local Moran's eye, get this OG and so on. And they basically assess the autocorrelation or spatial autocorrelation in data sets. What I would like to do is to assess the spatial-temporal autocorrelation. And some people do this. You know Erich Delmel, right, from UNCC. He's doing a lot of work on STKD, meaning kernel density estimation in space and time. yes, works, it can be implemented, but what the outputs mean, nobody can tell. And this is something which I'm a bit still struggling with in the entire spatial temporal world there.
A big part of that seems to be, so the Lisa in space, in unconstrained space is always a little bit of a question anyways, because people aren't entirely unconstrained in space.
Yeah.
And it just seems to be more so when you include time. So the easiest thing is to say, okay, let's just add a dimension, but not everything is everywhere at every time.
Yeah.
So maybe that sort of approach when you look at paths in space-time, just like you look at a road network, for example,
yeah,
and measure the pairwise distances there, might be a best approach.
Yes, I mean that's always the I wouldn't say low-hanging fruit, but that's possible, right? To say either measure connections in space and time and then connect them to each other somehow, or to analyze temporal snapshots spatially and then run them through. And this is probably perhaps even the best way to go. I'm just intrigued by this idea because it's such a methodological challenge and the concepts are yet to be addressed. So.
Well, I mean, if you're mainly looking at pairwise distances to do your measure of association, then you can do that, for example, as times. How long does it take to get from one occurrence to another in both space and time? How long, for example, a network that might afford that transportation?
That's an excellent point.
I mean, people have brought that up. Cressy brings that up a bit, but that's the point at which I usually lose him. But there seem to be some worthwhile ideas there too.
So we've tried to do this in urban motions actually to relate space to time via the velocity, and this could be an approach here as well. So you would have to assume standardized travel times to some degree, right?
Yeah.
Or travel speeds, let's say.
But increasingly that's available, you can
Yeah.
find out.
No, I mean I guess most people are walking here anyway. Like if we think about at least the migration flows.
So Bernd,
Yeah.
next question. So, with geographic weighted regression, is there a kind of a weighted regression? Because I'm thinking that there's like issues of scale and time. Like for example, like you're talking about movements of people, I guess, but you could have like seasonal movement. Like let's say people move in order to go harvest something. So there's like seasonal migration. And then there's like, other kinds of clustering events that are caused by something or other, like change in laws that make people cluster at this bridge, or there's a disaster and suddenly people need to go to a camp to escape some disaster. And so, but all these happen in different scales of time.
Exactly.
And I'm wondering if I don't know, but is there any way to detect if you just threw a bunch of data into a situation, can you do temporal weighted regression, try to figure out where those clustering scales of time are? Like, does something happen in months, or does it happen in a couple of days, or does it happen in a couple of hours? Could you find those in your data sets?
If we think time is a one-dimensional space, then I would say this should be possible, right? Because signal analysis, like detecting gradients, peaks, and so on, or the duration of peaks, should be possible. Again, it's a matter, I totally agree with you, a matter of scale, especially from the geographic viewpoint. I mean, what I've been doing with René, right? I think I presented it 2 years ago, 1 year.
I forgot.
Basically, using get this or G, what it does is that it takes one point into consideration and draws a radius. Problem is you mix up different scales.
Right.
So if you have a process that only is on a smaller scale, but you still use the large distance, then you will lose information in that your process may get hidden in other dominant processes in dominant scales. And that's why we developed this methodology to only, or basically a scale-aware get this or G method. And this could be a good combination there, like TWR if you wish, connected with.
Yeah, when you translate, using some sort of routing and velocity into, for example, walk time or something, then the pairwise distances you calculate can go right into a geotemporal related regression.
Totally.
But I guess the problem is often to, as you said, decide what the hypothesis is. Are these events connected by driving, or are they connected by something else? Is it really local in that you have to say, okay, this event at rush hour is connected to this other event at midnight?
Exactly.
So the speed varies.
I mean, for migration routes, I would hope that we can get input on these kinds of questions and hypotheses and assumptions that we need to take from external sources. So we're doing this closely together with the MSF, the UN, and the Red Cross. So I hope that these people should actually know about these things, and we're just writing up questions we're posing to them, and this is definitely going to go on the list.
Well, it would be interesting to pursue some of this. We're looking at doing this large-scale analysis using GPU computing, and one of the things that I think we're contributing is data sets that at first appearance don't seem very large, except there's some combinatorial effect. It turns out they're very large, and so moderately sized data sets that involve, for example, taking all the pairwise distances for some variety of conditions. Okay, what are the pairwise driving times? What's the pairwise train times, and so on? This might be another situation where you can end up with a very large data set in actuality once you take all of the permutations into consideration.
Here, the computer scientists at the University of Salzburg are really good. What they say is, and we had the same problem, if you remember, I said scales quadratically with the graph-based approach in emotion labeling. What they say is we do not have to compute n square half, but we just leave out a few. Out of informed decisions, obviously, without information loss. It's kind of a miracle to me, and I haven't looked through it to some degree, but they just say, if this and this happens, then, I don't know, for example, the threshold can't be reached anymore, and then it just cut the rest. And this is why they don't have to. It's basically assumptions in this case. So what we have in our case for the emotions are 7 linguistic plus temporal plus spatial features, and they would group them by significance, by weight basically, and say if the first one doesn't reach this level, the other ones combined cannot reach this level, so we can just throw it away and do not have to compute everything anymore. They mostly work with set similarity joints.
Are there any other questions? Maybe we should cut it off and you and...
Yeah, I'm here anyway until next week, right? So if you want to...
Yeah,
I got a curiosity.
there you go.
In terms of human migration, is there, you think it'd be very valuable to have something similar to, what the USGS has for river levels in this country, where they're monitored all the time, except for doing that for human flow in Europe. Is there a group of people that talk about that in terms of getting counts of where immigrants are coming into at certain intervals of time, or border crossings or refugee camps, or some sort of monitor network?
I guess that's one of the hard parts, because the Euro has open borders, right? Except for Germany versus Austria at the moment. So you can just cross between countries without anything. So you can just move legally and without any controls. And so it's hard to register these people, because they just cross the border either somewhere in the green border or via the official border.
And there's no border guard that makes a check or something?
No. Because there is no passport controls, right? So we'll never know who's crossing the border.
Well, there your social media analysis might come into play. I think that if you feed, like if you harvest, like these people, I assume that most of them also have smartphones and they're also doing things while they're going. And if you get a batch of data, right, I think the challenge is really to cluster it in both space and time so that you see clusters moving through space or clusters moving through time.
Definitely.
Space and time actually aggregated space. If you're only looking at time, it might be same number of crowds, right?
I agree.
And if you're looking only at the space, it may be either zero or a lot.
Yep.
So if you can track the cluster based on both space and time, then you could monitor the flow.
Totally. I mean, this is the output of spatial temporal current density estimation by Eric and co. Would basically do exactly this, right? You see, like third dimension would be time in this case.
Right.
So you would see how clusters develop and also how they move over time. Yeah, no.
Once you know the scale, these things are not hard to compete. But how do you define the scale first? Yeah. Right. So it could be if it's too big, then you lose the pattern. If you're just too small, you lose the pattern too. It's really
exactly.
You know. I don't know.
Did you have a last
I do
question?
have a question, sorry, about the first part of the research about the Twitter analysis that you already did in the past.
Mm-hmm.
And something I've wondered for a little while. Have you seen differences in the use of Twitter in different locations? So I noticed that you use London and Birmingham and not Austria. Is it because people there don't tweet as much, or there's different social groups? Maybe you have a much diverse group of people tweeting in the US than you have in Austria or Germany. There might be just younger people. And I'm wondering if you've looked at that, or if you know about anything like that.
Yeah, there are many studies on that. So first of all, the typical Twitter user is 27, male, white, and well-educated.
In Austria?
In general?
Anywhere?
Perhaps not. Yeah. Of course, there are different densities. So Twitter users per country, meaning per capita, plus tweets per person and so on, highly differ between countries. That's why you will find studies on the internet, on social media, predominantly in London, New York, perhaps San Francisco, or the entire US, and Brazil. So these are the three main countries with the highest densities. And this is a big problem for us, obviously, because in the countries which we're looking at right now, they're partly in Africa, where Twitter use is not as high. They have like very dedicated, let's say, means of communication, including one-to-one messengers, which are not even known to us. And then there is, of course, the language problem that we always need to analyze what's happening there semantically. But this works as long as there is one language present in the tweet. That's fine. If people start mixing a lot, and that's a problem in Africa, because many people tweet in the official language of their country, in some kind of dialect and in English, all in the same tweet, and then it becomes really difficult for us. So yes, all the implications you mentioned are definitely true, and are a clear limitation, which is broadly described in all the papers I presented.
Well, thanks very much. Let's stop here and thank you.
Thank you.